whispers of RPG, where every quest begins with a whisper and every story unfolds with a spark. Have you ever wondered what secrets lie hidden in the worlds of your favorite RPGs? Stick around as we dive deep and uncover tales that might just change how you see your next adventure. Arise now, ye tarnished, your dead who yet live. The call of long-lost grace speaks to us all. These words spoken by a narrator whose identity remains shrouded in mystery immediately establish something profound about our protagonist and the nature of existence in the lands between. But what does it truly mean to be among the dead who yet live? This single phrase has sparked countless discussions among lore enthusiasts and casual players alike. Are we literally dead, walking corpses, animated by some divine force? Are we undead in the traditional sense, like the hollow warriors of Dark Souls? Or is something far more complex at play here? Something that speaks to the very nature of death, divinity, and resurrection in Miyazaki's meticulously crafted world. The question becomes even more intriguing when we consider the mechanical reality of playing Elden Ring. When our Tarnished falls in battle, they don't simply reload from a save file in the traditional video game sense. Instead, they awaken at a site of grace, their body restored, their spirit renewed, ready to face whatever challenge struck them down. This resurrection isn't merely a gameplay convenience. It's woven deeply into the fabric of the world's law, connected to ancient pacts, divine interventions, and the very structure of reality in the lands between. As we delve deeper into this mystery, we'll discover that the nature of Tarnished resurrection touches upon some of the most fundamental aspects of Elden Ring's narrative. It connects to Queen Marika's grand design, the role of the greater will, the function of the Erdtree, and even the tragic history revealed in the shadow of the Erdtree expansion. The answer to whether the Tarnished are truly dead and being resurrected will take us through the deepest corners of the game's lore. From the cosmic manations of outer gods to the intimate tragedy of a shaman village hidden in shadow. What makes this question particularly fascinating is how it reflects Miyazaki's approach to storytelling through mechanics. In previous FromSoftware titles, resurrection mechanics were often tied to curses. The dark sign in Dark Souls, the dragon's blood in Sekiro. But in Elden Ring, resurrection seems to be presented as a blessing, a gift of grace that marks the chosen few. Yet, as we'll explore, this apparent blessing may be more complex than it initially appears. The Tarnished occupy a unique position in the pantheon of FromSoftware protagonists. Unlike the chosen undead or the good hunter, whose supernatural qualities are immediately apparent and often portrayed as curses or burdens, the Tarnished's relationship with death and resurrection is framed differently. They are called to greatness, beckoned by grace, promised lordship. Yet they share with their predecessors This fundamental separation from the natural order of life and death. To understand what the Tarnished truly are, we must examine not just the mechanics of their resurrection, but the historical context that created them, the divine forces that sustain them, and the ultimate purpose they're meant to serve. We'll need to trace the thread from America's ancient banishment of Godfrey and his warriors through the long march that scattered the first Tarnished across distant lands to their eventual return in the Age of the Shattering. The mystery deepens when we consider that not all Tarnished seem to share the same relationship with death. Some, like our protagonist, appear to possess an inexhaustible ability to return from defeat. Others, like Sorcerer Roya, gradually lose their connection to grace and eventually face true permanent death. What distinguishes these different types of Tarnished? Is it a matter of will, of divine favor, or something else entirely? Furthermore, the shadow of the Erdtree expansion has revealed new layers to this mystery, providing context about America's origins and motivations that cast the entire Tarnished phenomenon in a different light. The discovery of the shaman village and the revelation of America's tragic past suggests that the creation of the Tarnished may have been part of a plan far more complex and long-term than previously imagined. As we begin this exploration, it's important to remember that Elden Ring's law, like that of all FromSoftware games, is deliberately layered and often ambiguous. The developers provide pieces of a puzzle, but the complete picture must be assembled by careful observation, interpretation, and sometimes educated speculation. The question of Tarnished resurrection touches upon themes of mortality, divinity, sacrifice, and redemption that resonate throughout the entire narrative. In the coming sections, we'll examine the mechanics of death in the lands between, the historical events that created the Tarnished, the nature of grace, and its relationship to resurrection, and the ultimate revelation of what it truly means to be among the dead who yet live. We'll discover that the answer to this question is not simply about the state of the Tarnished's physical body, but about their role in a cosmic drama that spans millennia and involves forces beyond mortal comprehension. The journey to understanding begins with examining the very nature of death itself in the lands between, and how Queen Marika's actions fundamentally altered the relationship between life, death, and what lies beyond. The nature of death in the lands between. To understand whether the Tarnished are truly dead and being resurrected, we must first grasp how death itself functions in the lands between. This is not a world where death operates according to natural laws as we might understand them. Instead, death in Elden Ring's universe is governed by divine decree, cosmic intervention, and the fundamental forces that shape reality itself. The most crucial element in understanding death in the lands between is the concept of destined death. This isn't simply death as we know it, but rather the cosmic principle that allows for true, final, irrevocable ending. Destined death represents the natural order of mortality, the force that ensures all things, gods, demigods, and mortals alike, can face genuine permanent cessation of existence. Music originally destined death was contained within the rune of death, one of the fundamental components of the Elden Ring itself. This rune embodied the principle that all life must eventually end, that death was not merely a temporary state, but a final destination under the natural order. When beings died, they would face true death. Their souls would depart, their stories would conclude, and they would not return. However, Queen Marika made a decision that would fundamentally alter the nature of existence in the lands between. She removed the rune of death from the Elden Ring, severing destined death from the cosmic order. This wasn't simply a theological change. It was a rewriting of the basic laws of reality. With destined death sealed away, true death became impossible for most beings in the lands between. The rune of death was entrusted to Marika's shadow, Malekith, the Black Blade, who was tasked with keeping it sealed and hidden. Malekith, being a shadow-bound beast granted to Marika by the Two Fingers, was both powerful enough to guard such a potent force and loyal enough to be trusted with it. The black flames that Malekith wields are manifestations of destined death itself, capable of killing even gods and immortals. With destined death removed from the natural order, the lands between entered what we might call the age of the Erdtree. During this period, death took on an entirely different character. Instead of representing an ending, death became a transition, a recycling process overseen by the great golden tree that dominated the landscape. When beings died, their souls would return to the Erdtree, where they would be processed and eventually reborn. This system created what we observe throughout Elden Ring, a world where death is temporary for many beings. The various enemies we encounter respawn when we rest at sites of grace. Not because of video game convenience, but because of this cosmic recycling system. The Erdtree constantly draws souls back into itself, processes them, and releases them back into the world. However, this resurrection system was not universal or unconditional. The ability to return from death appeared to be tied to one's connection to the Golden Order, and more specifically, to grace. Those blessed with grace could undergo this process of death and rebirth repeatedly. Those without grace, or those who lost their grace, would face a different fate. This explains why we see various types of undead and undying beings throughout the lands between. Those who live in death represent a corruption of this system. Beings who died but were touched by death root. The spreading influence of Godwyn, the Golden's half-death. These creatures exist in a liminal state, neither truly alive nor properly dead outside the tree's normal recycling process. The tree's role in this system cannot be understated. More than just a massive tree, the Erdtree functions as a cosmic repository for souls, a divine recycling center that processes the essence of all beings in the lands between. The vast root system we see in the catacombs throughout the game serves as a collection network, drawing souls into the tree's embrace upon death. This understanding helps explain why the catacombs exist as they do in Elden Ring. These aren't simply burial grounds in the traditional sense. They're processing centers where bodies are delivered to the tree's roots. The tree guardians we encounter in these locations aren't just protecting graves. They're maintaining the infrastructure of the death and rebirth system. The removal of destined death also explains why the demigods proved so difficult to kill permanently, even for each other during the shattering. Without access to destined death, the conflicts between America's children became wars of attrition rather than decisive battles. Even when a demigod fell, they wouldn't truly die. They would simply be reduced to a diminished state, eventually returning in some form. This system also created the phenomenon we see with remembrances. When particularly powerful beings die, their essence is hunned into the tree, creating these crystallized memories that contain both their power and their story. Remembrances represent the tree's way of preserving the most significant souls, preventing them from being lost to the recycling process. The concept of grace becomes crucial in this context. Grace appears to be the mechanism by which the tree identifies who should be included in its resurrection system. Those who possess grace are essentially marked as participants in the Golden Order, entitled to its benefits, including protection from true death. When grace is withdrawn, as it was from the Tarnished, beings lose this protection and become vulnerable to permanent death. However, the restoration of grace, as happens to the Tarnished after the shattering, would logically restore access to the resurrection system. This begins to explain how the Tarnished can repeatedly return from death. They're operating under the same divine protection that shields other grace-blessed beings from true mortality. Yet there are complexities to this system that suggest it's not simply a matter of having grace or not having it. Some tarnished despite possessing grace gradually lose their ability to resurrect. Sorcerer Royer provides the clearest example of this phenomenon. He mentions having died before, indicating he's experienced resurrection, but he eventually faces permanent death as his grace fades. This suggests that grace is not a static blessing, but a dynamic force that can strengthen or weaken based on various factors. The vigor of one's grace appears to determine not just their ability to resurrect, but how many times they can do so before the process begins to fail. The shadow of the tree expansion has revealed additional layers to this system, particularly regarding America's true motivations for removing destined death. The revelation that America was originally a shaman whose people were tortured and killed by the Hornsent suggests that her decision to seal away destined death may have been motivated by a desire to prevent such final, irreversible loss. Understanding this cosmic framework is essential for evaluating the nature of tarnished resurrection. The tarnished aren't operating outside the normal rules of death in the lands between. They're operating within a modified system where death has been fundamentally redefined. The question isn't whether they're truly dead in our world sense, but how they fit into a universe where death itself has been transformed from an ending into a transition. The historical context, banishment, and the long march. The story of the tarnished begins not with their resurrection, but with their creation through exile. To understand what the tarnished truly are and why they possess their unique relationship with death, we must examine the historical events that brought them into existence. This tale begins in the early days of the Erdtree's dominance, when Queen Marika ruled alongside her first consort, Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Godfrey was not originally an Elden Lord, nor was he even originally named Godfrey. Before his elevation, he was known as Hueru, a chieftain of the Badlands, a warrior of tremendous skill and ferocity. His transformation from barbarian chieftain to refined lord represents one of the most significant character arcs in Elden Ring's background lore, and his eventual fate would create the entire category of beings we know as the Tarnished. When Marika ascended to godhood and established the Golden Order, she faced numerous challenges to her authority. The early age of the Erdtree was marked by warfare, as Marika sought to establish her dominion over the various peoples and powers of the lands between. Chief among these challenges were the fire giants, ancient beings who possessed the flame of ruin, a power capable of burning down the tree itself. Marika recognized that she needed a champion, a warrior capable of leading her armies against these existential threats. In Halu, she found not just a powerful individual warrior, but a leader who commanded the loyalty of his own people. The marriage between Marika and Horalu was both a political alliance and a genuine partnership, combining divine authority with martial prowess. Upon their union, Horalu was transformed into Godfrey, first Elden Lord. This transformation was more than symbolic. It involved a fundamental change in his nature. The wild, barbaric aspects of his personality were suppressed, contained within the spectral lion sash that appeared upon his back. Sash served as both a symbol of Godfrey's tamed nobility and a literal restraint upon his more savage impulses. Together, Marika and Godfrey waged the wars that established the Golden Order's supremacy. Godfrey led the campaign against the fire giants, ultimately defeating the fell god and ensuring that the flame of ruin could no longer threaten the tree. He also fought against the Stormlord and numerous other threats to America's reign. These victories were crucial, not just for America's political power, but for the very survival of the Golden Order itself. During this period, Godfrey and America had children who would become some of the most significant figures in the game's lore. Godwyn the Golden, beloved prince, an eventual victim of the Night of Black Knives. Morgott and Mog, the twin omens whose cursed nature forced them into hiding. These children represented the pinnacle of the Golden Order's nobility, combining divine heritage with martial excellence. However, something changed after Godfrey's final victory. Item descriptions tell us that when his last enemy fell, the hue of his eyes faded. This cryptic phrase suggests that Godfrey lost something essential when he had no more worthy opponents to face. Some interpret this as the loss of his grace, others as the fading of his warrior spirit. Regardless of the specific mechanism, it's clear that Godfrey's usefulness to America's grand design had reached its end. What happened next would create the Tarnished and set in motion events that would culminate thousands of years later in the player's arrival in the lands between. America made the momentous decision to banish Godfrey and his warriors from the lands between. This wasn't simply exile. It was a fundamental severing of their connection to the Golden Order and the grace that sustained it. America's words at the Church of Pilgrimage, preserved through Melina's recollections, provide insight into this crucial moment. My lord and thy warriors, I divest you of your grace. With thine eyes dimmed, you will be driven from the lands between. You will wage war in a land afar, where you will live and die. These words weren't spoken in anger or disappointment, but as part of a carefully planned strategy. Crucially, America's declaration included a promise. Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed. Return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring. Grow strong in the face of death. This promise reveals that the banishment was never intended to be permanent. Instead, it was part of a long-term plan that required the Tarnished to spend time in exile, growing strong through hardship and warfare. The immediate result of this banishment was the Long March, a mass exodus of Godfrey and his followers from the lands between. This wasn't a chaotic flight, but an organized military campaign. The Tarnished didn't simply wander into exile. They marched out as an army, maintaining their structure and purpose even as they lost their grace. Evidence for the Long March can be found throughout the Weeping Peninsula, which appears to have been the route taken by the departing Tarnished. The Castle Morn storyline, with its atmosphere of lament and loss, may reflect the emotional weight of this departure. The Tower of Return, with its teleportation trap that sends players to Lindell, might originally have been built as a beacon for the eventual return of the Tarnished. The long march eventually brought Godfrey and his warriors to the Badlands regions outside the lands between, where they would continue their existence as exiles. In these foreign lands, they would wage wars, face death, and gradually grow strong in ways that would have been impossible had they remained within the comfortable confines of America's realm. But the long march didn't end with all the Tarnished following Godfrey to the same destination. Evidence suggests that the Tarnished diaspora spread across multiple lands and regions. Character backgrounds available to players suggest origins from various cultures and locations. The land of reeds, northern lands, nomadic peoples. This dispersal suggests that the original army of exiles eventually fragmented with different groups, settling in different regions. During their time in exile, the Tarnished lived full lives. They didn't simply exist in a state of suspended animation, awaiting their return. They formed new communities, established bloodlines, and integrated with local populations. This is evidenced by characters like Fia and Rodria, who come from royal lineages in distant lands, but are still considered tarnished. Being tarnished, it seems, became a hereditary condition passed down through bloodlines. The Tarnished in exile also maintained their warrior culture. Items like the Highland axe suggest that even generations after the Long March, descendants of Godfrey's warriors preserved the fighting traditions of their ancestors. The ceremonial aspects of combat, the battle cries, the formal introductions before fights persisted across the generations. During this period of exile, the Tarnished faced genuine death. Unlike their later resurrection-enabled existence, during the Long March and the subsequent period of exile, death was final for the Tarnished. They had been severed from grace and the protective mechanisms of the Golden Order. When they died in foreign wars, they remained dead. This understanding is crucial for interpreting America's promise. When she spoke of giving back grace after thy death, she was referring to literal death, the permanent end that would come to all Tarnished during their exile. The restoration of grace wasn't simply about returning a blessing to living beings, but about calling back the dead themselves. The mechanism by which this resurrection occurred remains one of the deeper mysteries of Elden Ring's law. It suggests that America retained some connection to the exiled, Tarnished, even after severing their grace, and that she possessed the power to restore not just their divine blessing, but their very lives. This implies a level of divine authority that extends beyond the normal bounds of the Golden Order. The timing of this mass resurrection is significant. Grace was restored to the Tarnished after the shattering, when America's demigod children proved incapable of claiming the throne and restoring the Elden Ring. This suggests that the Tarnished were always intended as a contingency plan, a force that could be called upon if America's primary dynasty failed. Some of the most compelling evidence for this interpretation comes from America's relationship with Hug, the misbegotten blacksmith of Round Table Hold. Hug speaks of a promise he made to America to forge a weapon capable of killing a god. The timing and nature of this promise suggests it was made in anticipation of the Tarnished's return, preparing them for battles against powers that had once seemed unassailable. The revelation in shadow of the Erdtree about America's origins as a shaman adds another layer to this historical context. The discovery that America's people were tortured and killed by the Hornsent provides a potential motivation for her creation of the Tarnished. Having experienced the permanent loss of her people, America may have designed the Tarnished as a force that could overcome any opposition, including death itself. This historical framework establishes that the Tarnished's relationship with death is not a natural condition, but an artificial one created through divine intervention. They are not inherently undead or immortal beings, but mortals who have been granted resurrection through America's power and planning. Understanding this distinction is crucial for answering the central question of their nature: grace, guidance, and the calling back. The concept of grace lies at the very heart of understanding what the Tarnished are and how their resurrection functions. Grace is not simply a blessing or a form of divine favor. It is the fundamental mechanism that connects beings to the cosmic order of the lands between. And more importantly, for our purposes, it is the force that enables resurrection from death. Grace manifests visually as a golden light that dwells within the eyes of those blessed by it. This isn't merely symbolic. Characters throughout the game comment on the presence or absence of this golden gleam as a reliable indicator of whether someone possesses grace. When we encounter other Tarnished who have lost their grace, one of the most common observations is that their eyes have grown dim, losing that characteristic golden luminosity. The relationship between grace and the tree appears to be fundamental. Grace is described as emanating from the tree and the elder ring, representing their presence and influence in the world. Those who possess grace are essentially marked as participants in the Golden Order, entitled to its protections and bound by its laws. When grace is withdrawn, the connection to this divine system is severed. But grace is not a simple on-off switch. The evidence suggests that grace exists in varying degrees of intensity and stability. Some Tarnished, like our protagonist, seem to possess a particularly robust connection to grace that allows for seemingly unlimited resurrection. Others, like Sorcerer Royer, begin with grace, but gradually lose it over time, eventually facing permanent death when their connection fails completely. Roya's case is particularly instructive for understanding how grace operates. He specifically mentions having died before indicating that he has experienced resurrection. However, over the course of his quest line, we witness his gradual decline. He speaks of growing weary, of feeling his grace fade, and eventually he succumbs to a final death from which he does not return. This progression suggests that grace can be depleted through repeated use or weakened by certain circumstances. The certain circumstances that can weaken grace appear to be related to exposure to forces that oppose the Golden Order. Roya's decline is linked to his investigation of those who live in death and his contact with Deathroot. The corruption that spreads through his body seems to interfere with his connection to grace, gradually severing the divine link that enables his resurrection. This understanding helps explain why different Tarnished have different relationships with death and resurrection. It's not simply a matter of being tarnished or not being tarnished. It's about the strength and stability of one's grace. The player character appears to possess an exceptionally strong connection to grace, one that can withstand repeated deaths and resurrections without weakening. The guidance aspect of grace is equally important for understanding the Tarnished's nature. Grace doesn't simply enable resurrection. It actively guides the Tarnished towards specific goals and locations. The golden threads of guidance that point towards sites of grace and important objectives aren't arbitrary. They represent grace actively directing the Tarnished toward fulfilling their purpose. This guidance suggests that grace is not a passive blessing, but an active force with its own agenda. The Tarnished aren't simply wandering the lands between with the incidental ability to resurrect. They're being deliberately guided towards specific goals by the force that grants them this power. This raises important questions about agency and free will in the Tarnished's journey. The sites of grace themselves provide crucial insight into how the resurrection system operates. These locations are described as containing luminous remnants of grace, suggesting that they're not simply arbitrary checkpoints, but specific locations where grace concentrates and manifests. The fact that the Tarnished resurrect specifically at these sites, rather than at the location of their death, indicates that the resurrection process is tied to these grace-concentrated areas. The mechanism of resurrection appears to involve the soul or consciousness returning to the most recently visited site of grace, where it is reunited with a restored body. This process bears similarities to the tree's normal death and rebirth cycle, but with important differences. Unlike normal resurrection through the tree, which appears to involve a complete recycling of the soul, Tarnished resurrection preserves continuity of memory and identity. The restoration of grace to the Tarnished after the shattering represents one of the most significant events in the game's timeline. This wasn't simply Marika deciding to lift a punishment. It was the activation of a contingency plan that had been prepared centuries earlier. The fact that grace was restored to Tarnished across multiple lands simultaneously suggests a coordinated divine intervention of massive scope. The calling back of the Tarnished involved not just the restoration of grace, but actual resurrection from death. The opening narration refers to the Tarnished as ye dead who yet live, and various sources confirm that the Tarnished had actually died during their exile before being called back. This mass resurrection represents one of the most dramatic demonstrations of divine power in the game's law. The specificity of who received grace also provides important clues about the selection criteria. Not every descendant of the original exiled Tarnished was called back. Only specific individuals who met certain criteria. The opening cinematic shows us several of these chosen Tarnished fear: the deathbed companion Gideon, Ofnir, the all-knowing dung-eater gold mask, and of course, our protagonist. Each of these chosen Tarnished represents a different approach to the challenge facing the lands between. Fear seeks to establish a new order based on acceptance of death. Gold Mask pursues the perfection of the existing golden order. Dung Eater aims to curse all existence, and so forth. This suggests that grace was restored not randomly, but with the intention of providing multiple potential solutions to the crisis. The fact that these diverse Tarnished were all granted the same fundamental power resurrection through grace suggests that this ability is seen as necessary equipment for the task ahead. The challenges facing anyone attempting to claim the Elden Ring are so severe that the ability to return from death repeatedly is considered essential rather than optional. However, the restoration of grace to the Tarnished also came with limitations and conditions. Not all Tarnished who returned proved capable of maintaining their grace indefinitely. Some, like various non-player characters we encounter, speak of losing their grace and facing the prospect of permanent death. This suggests that the initial calling back was just the beginning. Maintaining grace requires ongoing fulfillment of certain conditions. The shadow of the Erdtree expansion has provided additional context for understanding grace through the revelations about America's origins and the nature of the two fingers. The discovery that the two fingers may not have been in communication with the greater will for millennia raises questions about the ultimate source of grace and whether it represents divine will or something else entirely. The revelation about Mesha, Mother of Fingers, suggests that the entire system of grace and divine guidance may have been operating without direct oversight from the greater will for far longer than anyone realized. This doesn't necessarily invalidate the power of grace, but it does complicate our understanding of its ultimate purpose and origin. If grace is not directly controlled by the greater will, but rather represents the actions of abandoned intermediaries like Meteor and the Two Fingers. Then the resurrection of the Tarnished might represent not divine intervention, but the desperate actions of cosmic entities trying to fulfill ancient directives without clear guidance from their supposed master. This interpretation would cast the Tarnished's resurrection in a different light, not as the execution of a divine plan, but as the product of cosmic entities attempting to resolve a crisis using outdated instructions and incomplete information. The fact that multiple Tarnished with contradictory goals were all granted. Grace might reflect this confusion rather than deliberate planning. Regardless of its ultimate source, grace remains the practical mechanism that enables Tarnished resurrection. It connects them to sites of grace, guides their actions, and provides the divine energy necessary for returning from death. Understanding grace is therefore crucial for understanding what the Tarnished are. Beings who have been granted an artificial connection to cosmic forces that override the normal rules of mortality. The Tarnished are not naturally immortal or undead. They are mortals who have been equipped with a divine override system that allows them to bypass death through the power of grace. This distinction is important because it suggests that their resurrection is not inherent to their nature, but dependent on maintaining their connection to this external force, sites of grace, and their true purpose. The sites of grace scattered throughout the lands between are far more than mere checkpoints or resting places for weary travelers. These luminous golden markers represent a sophisticated divine infrastructure that serves multiple crucial functions in the cosmic order of Elden Ring universe. To understand how Tarnished resurrection truly works, we must examine these sites not just as gameplay conveniences, but as integral components of a vast metaphysical system. Each site of grace consists of what appears to be a small collection of golden root-like structures, emanating light and particles that drift upward like ethereal embers. These are described as luminous remnants of grace, suggesting they are not simply decorative elements, but actual concentrations of the divine force that enables Tarnished resurrection. The fact that these sites can be seen glowing from significant distances indicates they possess considerable supernatural energy. The distribution of sites of grace throughout the lands between follows patterns that suggest deliberate placement rather than random occurrence. They appear at crucial junctions near important landmarks before challenging encounters, and in locations that would be strategically valuable for travelers. This distribution implies that the sites were established as part of a comprehensive network designed to support specific activities, namely the quest of the Tarnished to claim the Elden Ring. When we examine the functionality of sites of grace, their true sophistication becomes apparent. Resting at these sites doesn't simply restore the Tarnished's health and magical energy. it performs a complete reset of their physical and spiritual condition. Injuries are healed, exhaustion is eliminated, and magical reserves are fully replenished. This level of restoration goes far beyond natural rest and clearly involves supernatural intervention. More significantly, sites of grace serve as anchor points for resurrection. When a tarnished dies anywhere in the world, their consciousness and soul return to the most recently activated site of grace, where they are reunited with a fully restored body. This process is instantaneous and appears to involve the complete reconstruction of the tarnished's physical form, rather than simply healing their corpse. The mechanics of this resurrection process reveal important details about the nature of tarnished existence. The fact that the tarnished resurrect at sites of grace, rather than where they died, suggests that their consciousness or soul is fundamentally linked to these locations. Death essentially triggers a recall function that draws the tarnished's essence back to the safety of grace. The relationship between sites of grace and the broader Erdtree root network provides crucial context for understanding this system. Throughout the lands between, we can observe that the underground is permeated with massive tree roots belonging to the tree. These roots connect distant locations and appear to form a vast communication and transport network. Sites of grace may represent surface manifestations or access points to this underground network. This connection to the tree's root system helps explain how sites of grace can instantly resurrect tarnished from anywhere in the world. The tree's roots essentially serve as a supernatural internet, allowing for the rapid transmission of souls and information across vast distances. When a tarnished dies, their soul travels through this network to the nearest active grace site, where it can be reunited with a restored body. The process of discovering sites of grace also reveals important aspects of their nature. Sites of grace aren't simply found lying around the landscape waiting to be activated. Instead, they must be touched and acknowledged by a grace-blessed individual before they become functional. This suggests that sites of grace exist in a dormant state until activated by someone with the proper spiritual qualifications. The fact that only grace-blessed individuals can activate sites of grace indicates that these locations are secured against unauthorized use. This security measure makes sense given their function. Sites of grace essentially provide godlike powers of resurrection and restoration, and such capabilities would be incredibly dangerous if available to hostile forces. The guidance function of sites of grace provides another layer of insight into their purpose. Active sites of grace emit golden threads that point toward objectives, other grace sites, or important locations. This guidance system suggests that sites of grace are not just passive anchor points, but active participants in directing the Tarnished's journey. They don't simply provide resurrection. They actively guide the resurrected Tarnished toward fulfilling their mission. This guidance capability implies that sites of grace possess some form of intelligence or connection to a guiding consciousness. They somehow know where the Tarnished should go next and can provide navigation assistance accordingly. This level of sophisticated functionality suggests that sites of grace are components of a larger artificial intelligence system rather than simply magical waypoints. The introduction of Stakes of America in certain areas provides an interesting counterpoint to sites of grace. These tall, slender markers allow Tarnished to choose their resurrection point when they die nearby, but they don't provide the full restoration and guidance functions of sites of grace. Stakes of America appear to be simplified resurrection points that provide basic functionality without the comprehensive support system. The existence of Stakes of America suggests that the resurrection technology underlying sites of grace can be implemented in different forms with varying capabilities. This modularity implies that the entire system was deliberately designed and engineered rather than arising through natural processes. Someone or something created this resurrection network with specific purposes in mind. The temporal aspects of sites of grace also deserve attention. These locations allow Tarnished to manipulate the passage of time, advancing from day to night, or vice versa, at will. This temporal control suggests that sites of grace exist partially outside normal time, or have the ability to manipulate local temporal conditions. Such capabilities far exceed simple healing or resurrection and indicate connection to fundamental cosmic forces. The ability to level up at sites of grace reveals another crucial function. They serve as interfaces for soul processing and power enhancement. When Tarnished spend runes to increase their attributes, they're essentially using sites of grace as terminals for upgrading their spiritual and physical capabilities. This process involves the conversion of accumulated life energy, runes, into permanent improvements to the Tarnished's fundamental nature. The fact that this upgrading process can only be performed at sites of grace suggests that these locations possess the necessary infrastructure for safely modifying souls. Such modifications would be incredibly dangerous if performed incorrectly, potentially resulting in spiritual damage or dissolution. Sites of grace apparently provide the controlled environment necessary for such delicate operations. The connection between sites of grace and finger maidens provides additional context for their function. Finger maidens are described as beings who can convert runes into strength for their assigned Tarnished. The fact that this process occurs at sites of grace suggests that these locations serve as workshops where finger maidens can safely perform soul modification procedures. The shadow of the tree expansion has revealed additional details about the infrastructure underlying sites of grace. Through its exploration of the relationship between the lands between and the realm of shadow, the discovery that these realms may be overlaid versions of the same geographic space suggests that sites of grace might be accessing a network that spans multiple dimensional layers. In the realm of shadow, we encounter Erdtree fragments that serve a similar function to sites of grace in the base game, providing power enhancement and serving as rally points. The parallel between these systems suggests that the Grace Network might be one implementation of a more fundamental technology for supporting artificial resurrection and power enhancement. The revelation about America's origins and her connection to shamanic traditions also provides new context for sites of grace. The shamanic ability to meld harmoniously with others might be related to the technology underlying grace sites. These locations might represent applications of shamanic soul-working techniques scaled up to divine proportions. Understanding sites of grace as sophisticated components of divine infrastructure, rather than simple checkpoints, changes our perspective on what the Tarnished represent. Based on this interpretation, they would not simply be undead beings who happen to resurrect. They would be participants in an elaborate support system designed to enable their success. Their resurrection would not be an inherent supernatural ability, but rather access to a carefully engineered network of divine technology. Though this technological framing goes beyond what is explicitly described in the game's law, this technological interpretation suggests that Tarnished resurrection is both more and less than true resurrection. It's more because it involves sophisticated supernatural engineering that goes far beyond simply returning from death. It's less because it's not a fundamental override of mortality, but rather access to an artificial system that simulates the effects of immortality. The dependence on sites of grace also explains why Tarnished, who lose their grace, eventually face permanent death. Without access to the Grace Network, they lose the ability to utilize sites of grace for resurrection. Their connection to the system is severed, making them vulnerable to true death despite their previous apparent immortality. The mechanics of Tarnished death and return. To truly understand whether the Tarnished are dead and being resurrected or something else entirely, we must examine the precise mechanics of what happens when a Tarnished dies and subsequently returns. This process is far more complex and nuanced than a simple death and resurrection cycle, involving intricate supernatural mechanisms that blur the line between life, death, and something altogether different. When a Tarnished receives what would normally be fatal damage, several things occur almost simultaneously. First, there's the physical trauma that would kill a normal being. whether from weapon wounds, magical damage, environmental hazards, or any other lethal force. However, the Tarnished doesn't simply die in the conventional sense. Instead, their consciousness appears to separate from their physical form while maintaining complete continuity of memory and identity. This separation process appears to be central to understanding the phenomenon. The Tarnished experience seems to differ from traditional resurrection narratives, where a deceased individual returns to life after a period of being truly dead. Based on the seamless nature of the process, this could suggest something more akin to consciousness preservation or spiritual intervention rather than conventional death and revival. The continuity of the resurrection experience provides important clues about its nature. When a Tarnished dies, there's no apparent gap in consciousness or period of void. One moment, they're experiencing fatal damage. The next, they're awakening at a site of grace with full awareness of what happened. This continuity could imply that consciousness is preserved throughout the process, though the exact mechanism remains unclear from the available evidence. The speed of the resurrection process also supports this interpretation. Traditional resurrection narratives typically involve some period where the deceased remains dead before being returned to life. Tarnished resurrection appears instantaneous, which could suggest that death never actually occurs, but is instead bypassed or prevented by grace intervention. Though this remains a matter of interpretation based on the observable evidence, the state of the Tarnished's body upon return provides additional evidence worth considering. When a Tarnished resurrects at a site of grace, their body appears completely restored, not just healed, but returned to perfect condition. This level of restoration goes far beyond conventional healing and might indicate complete reconstruction rather than mere repair, though the exact mechanism is not explicitly detailed in the law. This perfect reconstruction could imply that the resurrection process doesn't involve returning life to a damaged corpse, but rather creating an entirely new physical form to house the preserved consciousness. Based on this interpretation, the original body damaged beyond repair would be essentially discarded, while the consciousness is provided with a fresh vessel. This reading would make Tarnished resurrection fundamentally different from traditional resurrection and more akin to a sophisticated form of spiritual preservation and body replacement. Though this analysis goes beyond what is explicitly stated in the game's law, the loss of runes upon death provides another piece of the puzzle. When a Tarnished dies, they lose all accumulated runes, which can then be recovered from the location of their death. This mechanic suggests that runes are tied to the physical form rather than the consciousness. When the original body is destroyed, the runes remain with it rather than transferring to the new body created at the site of grace. However, certain elements do transfer from the old body to the new one. Equipment, consumables, and most importantly, memories and experiences all carry over to the resurrected form. This selective transfer suggests a sophisticated process that preserves essential aspects of identity while discarding the damaged physical form and accumulated spiritual energy. The experience of other tarnished who gradually lose their grace provides insight into how this system can fail. Sorcerer Roya's progressive decline suggests that repeated deaths can strain the grace connection, making each subsequent resurrection more difficult. Eventually, the system fails entirely, resulting in true permanent death when the grace network can no longer support the consciousness transfer process. This degradation pattern implies that grace functions like a limited resource or battery that can be depleted through overuse. Each resurrection draws on this spiritual energy, and some tarnished possess larger reserves or more efficient grace usage than others. The player character appears to have an exceptionally robust grace connection that can support unlimited resurrections under normal circumstances. The behavior of enemies in relation to tarnished death also provides clues about the nature of this process. When a tarnished dies, enemies typically cease their aggressive behavior and return to their original positions, as if the threat has been eliminated. This suggests that from their perspective, the tarnished has indeed died. The fact that they don't anticipate resurrection implies that this ability is not common knowledge or expectation. The respawning of enemies when tarnished rest at sites of grace reveals another aspect of how the resurrection system interacts with the broader world. Most enemies return to life when the tarnished uses a site of grace, suggesting that these locations trigger a wider reset effect that affects multiple beings. Simultaneously, this mass resurrection capability indicates that sites of grace are connected to the tree's fundamental life cycling systems. However, certain enemies don't respawn even when other creatures do. Bosses, unique characters, and certain special enemies remain dead permanently after being defeated. This selective resurrection suggests that the grace network distinguishes between different types of beings, providing unlimited resurrection only to specific categories of entities. The fact that bosses don't respawn, even though regular enemies do, implies that boss-level beings are processed differently by the tree systems. Rather than being recycled back into the world immediately, defeated bosses are hewn into the tree and converted into remembrances. This process appears to prevent their normal resurrection, suggesting that the tree can selectively disable resurrection for specific beings. The mechanism by which some tarnished permanently die despite possessing grace reveals important limitations of the system. Characters like D, Hunter of the Dead, can be killed permanently by other Tarnished, suggesting that certain types of damage or certain circumstances can overwhelm the grace protection system. This indicates that Tarnished resurrection, while powerful, is not absolute. The interaction between Tarnished resurrection and destined death provides crucial context for understanding these limitations. When destined death is unbound after defeating Malekith, the nature of death in the lands between fundamentally changes. This suggests that the Grace Resurrection system was specifically designed to function in a world where destined death was sealed, and its return threatens to disrupt the entire network. The experience of cooperating or fighting with other Tarnished through the multiplayer system also illuminates aspects of the resurrection mechanism. When summoned, Tarnished die in another player's world. They return to their own world rather than staying dead. This cross-dimensional resurrection capability suggests that the Grace network operates across multiple layers of reality, supporting Tarnished regardless of which version of the lands between they currently inhabit. The shadow of the Erdtree expansion has provided additional insight into resurrection mechanics through its introduction of the Erdtree fragment system. These fragments function similarly to Grace in the main game, but operate independently, suggesting that resurrection technology can be implemented through different supernatural frameworks. The parallel systems imply that resurrection capabilities are not unique to Grace, but represent applications of more fundamental cosmic principles. The revelation about America's shamanic origins also provides new context for understanding Tarnished resurrection. The shamanic ability to meld harmoniously with others might be the foundational technique underlying the Grace resurrection system. America may have scaled up shamanic soul-working practices to create the divine infrastructure that supports Tarnished resurrection. When we examine all these mechanics together, a picture emerges of Tarnished resurrection that is neither simple death and return nor conventional immortality. Instead, it appears to be a sophisticated supernatural process that prevents true death by intercepting consciousness at the moment of physical destruction and providing it with a new vessel. The Tarnished don't repeatedly die and come back to life. They repeatedly have their consciousness rescued from death and relocated to safety. This interpretation suggests that the question, are the Tarnished dead and being resurrected, may be based on a false premise. The Tarnished aren't dying in the true sense because their consciousness is preserved throughout the process. They're experiencing destruction of their physical form, followed by consciousness transfer to a new body. This is neither traditional life nor traditional death, but something altogether different. A kind of supernatural existence that transcends normal mortality through technological rather than inherent means. Living in death versus Tarnished resurrection, the lands between host several different supernatural states that challenge conventional understanding of life and death. To properly assess the nature of tarnished resurrection, we must compare it with other forms of undeath and unusual existence found throughout Elden Ring's world. Perhaps the most significant comparison is with those who live in death, a category of beings that provides a stark contrast to the tarnished experience, while illuminating crucial differences in how various forms of resurrection and undeath function. Those who live in death represent one of the most distinctive and tragic supernatural phenomena in the lands between. These skeletal creatures arose as a consequence of the Night of Black Knives and the subsequent spread of Death Root from Godwyn, the Golden's corrupted corpse. Unlike normal death, which would result in souls returning to the tree for processing, those who live in death exist in a liminal state between life and death, rejected by the Golden Order and unable to find peace. The fundamental difference between those who live in death and tarnished resurrection lies in their relationship to the established cosmic order. Those who live in death represent a corruption or failure of the normal death processing system. When Godwyn died in soul, but not in body, his half-death created a spreading contamination that prevented normal souls from being properly processed by the tree. These souls became trapped in a state of perpetual undeath, neither truly alive nor properly dead. Tarnished resurrection, by contrast, represents a functioning component of the cosmic order, albeit one that operates according to special rules, while those who live in death are rejected by the Golden Order and actively hunted by its agents. Tarnished are embraced by the system and supported by its infrastructure. The grace that enables tarnished resurrection is explicitly a blessing of the Golden Order, while the condition of those who live in death is seen as an abomination to be eliminated. The physical manifestations of these different states also reveal important distinctions. Those who live in death appear as skeletal creatures, their flesh long since decayed, maintaining animation through supernatural force alone. They are clearly deceased in any conventional sense. Yet they move and act with purpose. Tarnished, meanwhile, maintain their full physical form and appearance, showing no signs of decay or obvious undeath. They appear fully alive in every conventional sense. The resurrection mechanics also differ dramatically between these states. Those who live in death can return from destruction when killed, but their resurrection is crude and automatic. Strike down a skeletal warrior, and it will reanimate after a short period, unless its bones are completely destroyed or sanctified with holy energy. This resurrection appears to be an uncontrolled response to their corrupted state, rather than a sophisticated process. Tarnished resurrection, as we've explored, involves a complex process of consciousness preservation and body reconstruction, facilitated by the Grace Network. It's selective, controlled, and maintains perfect continuity of identity and memory. The contrast couldn't be sharper. One represents a crude, automatic reanimation of corrupted remains, while the other involves sophisticated supernatural technology that preserves the complete person while providing them with a restored physical form. The relationship to pain and suffering also distinguishes these states. Those who live in death seem to exist in a constant state of anguish, driven by unresolved attachments to life, and unable to find the peace that proper death would provide. Their existence is portrayed as tormented and tragic, a fate that even sympathetic characters like Fia and Royer consider worthy of compassion. Tarnished, by contrast, appear to experience no particular suffering from their resurrection ability. While the challenges they face are certainly difficult, their supernatural state doesn't seem to cause them direct torment. If anything, the ability to return from death might reduce suffering by eliminating the fear of permanent loss that motivates much mortal anguish. The social acceptance of these different states provides another point of comparison. Those who live in death are universally reviled by adherents of the Golden Order, hunted by specialized knights like D, and considered a threat to the proper functioning of the cosmic system. Efforts to aid or defend those who live in death are considered heretical and dangerous. Tarnished, while not universally welcomed, are generally recognized as legitimate participants in the world's affairs. They can interact normally with most NPCs, conduct business, form alliances, and pursue goals without the automatic hostility that those who live in death face. Their supernatural nature is seen as a blessing rather than a curse, marking them as chosen rather than corrupted. The purposes these states serve in the broader narrative also differ significantly. Those who live in death represent a problem to be solved, a corruption that threatens the stability of the cosmic order. Various quest lines involve either eliminating them entirely or finding ways to integrate them into a reformed cosmic system. They're portrayed as victims of circumstances beyond their control, suffering beings trapped in an unnatural state. Tarnished serve as protagonists and agents of change, empowered to make choices that will reshape the world. Their resurrection ability isn't a problem to be solved, but a tool to enable their success. They're portrayed as chosen beings with important roles to play rather than unfortunate victims of cosmic dysfunction. The reversibility of these conditions provides another crucial distinction. Those who live in death can potentially be cured through various means. FIA's quest line explores giving them proper death and peace, while the Golden Order fundamentalists seek to eliminate them entirely. Their state, while persistent, can theoretically be changed or ended. Tarnished resurrection appears to be a permanent modification rather than a temporary condition. While individual tarnished can lose their grace and become vulnerable to permanent death, there's no indication that they can simply choose to return to normal mortality while retaining their grace. The change appears to be fundamental and irreversible. The role of external forces in maintaining these states also differs. Those who live in death appear to be sustained by the death root corruption that spreads from Godwin's corpse. Remove or purify this source, and their condition might be resolved. Tarnished resurrection depends on the continuing function of the grace network and sites of grace. Without access to this infrastructure, the resurrection ability fails. The degrees of consciousness and free will associated with these states reveal another important difference. Those who live in death seem to retain some level of consciousness and memory, but they appear driven by compulsions related to their undead state. They often attack living beings automatically and seem unable to fully control their behavior. Tarnished maintain complete consciousness, free will, and moral agency. Their resurrection ability doesn't appear to influence their behavior or decision in any direct way. They can choose to pursue any goal and make any decision they wish, limited only by the same practical constraints that would affect any living person. The relationship to the broader themes of the game also distinguishes these forms of supernatural existence. Those who live in death represent the tragic consequences of imperfect solutions and the suffering that results from cosmic dysfunction. They embody themes of loss, corruption, and the need for compassion in the face of systemic failure. Tarnished resurrection embodies themes of agency, choice, and the power to overcome seemingly impossible challenges. It represents hope and possibility rather than tragedy and suffering. The tarnished's ability to return from death enables them to persist in the face of any obstacle and ultimately succeed in reshaping the world according to their will. When we consider all these factors together, it becomes clear that tarnished resurrection and living in death represent fundamentally different relationships to mortality and the cosmic order. Those who live in death are trapped between life and death, suffering from a corruption that prevents them from finding peace. Tarnished have transcended normal mortality through divine blessing, empowered to act as agents of cosmic change without the suffering typically associated with undeath. This comparison reinforces the interpretation that tarnished aren't simply undead beings, but rather living beings who have been granted access to supernatural technology that protects them from permanent death. They haven't died and come back to life. They've been equipped with a system that prevents them from truly dying in the first place. This distinction places them in a unique category that transcends traditional classifications of life, death, and undeath. The greater will's design and the tarnished role, the cosmic context surrounding the Tarnished's creation and purpose has undergone significant revision, with the revelations provided in shadow of the Erdtree, particularly regarding the nature of the Greater Will's involvement in the affairs of the lands between. To understand what the Tarnished truly are, we must examine their role within what was long believed to be the Greater Will's grand design, while also considering how recent discoveries about Meteor and the two fingers recontextualize this entire framework. For most of Elden Ring's narrative, the Greater Will is presented as the ultimate authority behind the Golden Order, the cosmic force that governs the lands between through its vassals and intermediaries. The two fingers serve as its envoys, selecting Empyreans to become gods and guiding the development of civilizations according to its mysterious plans. Within this framework, the Tarnished appeared to be instruments of the Greater Will's intention to restore order after the chaos of the Shattering. However, the shadow of the tree expansion has revealed that this understanding was fundamentally flawed. Media, Mother of Fingers, was indeed the first envoy of the Greater Will and the progenitor of all two fingers. But crucially, her communication with the Greater Will was severed long ago, leaving her and her offspring to operate based on outdated instructions and their own interpretations of what the Greater Will would want. This revelation dramatically recontextualizes the Tarnished's role and purpose. Rather than being created as part of an active divine plan, they may represent the actions of cosmic intermediaries trying to fulfill ancient directives without current guidance from their supposed master. The resurrection of the Tarnished and their empowerment with grace might not reflect the Greater Will's current intentions, but rather met here, and the two fingers attempts to resolve the crisis of the Shattering using the tools and authorities available to them. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond simple misunderstanding about the chain of command. If the two fingers have been operating without genuine Greater Will guidance for potentially millennia, then the entire Golden Order may represent a cosmic misinterpretation. The systems of death, resurrection, and divine authority that govern the lands between might not reflect cosmic law, but rather the increasingly desperate improvisation of abandoned servants. Within this context, the creation and empowerment of the Tarnished takes on new significance. Rather than representing the execution of a divine master plan, the calling back of the Tarnished might represent a crisis response by entities that no longer have clear guidance about how to proceed. Faced with the complete breakdown of their carefully maintained order, Meteor and the two fingers may have activated their most extreme contingency measures. The diversity of Tarnished called back supports this interpretation. The opening cinematic shows us several very different Tarnished with contradictory goals and philosophies. Fear seeks to legitimize those who live in death. Gold Mask pursues the perfection of the existing order. Dung Eater aims to curse all existence, and others pursue their own unique visions. This diversity suggests desperation rather than careful planning. Throw multiple solutions at the problem and hope one of them works. This scattershot approach would make sense if the entities making these decisions no longer had clear guidance about what solutions would be acceptable to their ultimate authority. Unable to determine what the greater will actually wants, they empowered multiple, tarnished with different approaches, essentially crowdsourcing the solution to a cosmic crisis. The specific powers granted to the tarnished also reflect this interpretation. The ability to resurrect from death repeatedly is exactly what would be needed for trial and error problem solving on a cosmic scale. If you're not sure what approach will work, empower agents who can keep trying different methods indefinitely. The Tarnished's resurrection ability isn't just a blessing. It's a practical necessity for their role as experimental problem solvers. The relationship between the Tarnished and America's original plan adds another layer of complexity to this analysis. Evidence suggests that America had her own agenda that diverged from the greater will's, or what she believed to be the greater will's intentions. The creation of the Tarnished through the banishment of Godfrey and his warriors appears to have been part of America's long-term strategy, rather than a direct command from higher authorities. America's actions in shattering the Elden Ring seemed designed to trigger exactly the kind of crisis that would force the Two Fingers to call back the Tarnished. If America knew or suspected that the Two Fingers were operating without current greater will guidance, she might have deliberately created a situation that would force them to activate her prepared contingency plan. The resurrection and empowerment of the Tarnished. This interpretation would make America the true architect of the Tarnished's resurrection, using the Two Fingers' outdated programming to execute her own agenda. The Tarnished would then be not servants of the greater will, but instruments of America's rebellion against the cosmic order that had trapped her in the role of God. The discovery of America's origins as a shaman adds important context that could help explain her motivations. The revelation that her people were tortured and killed by the Hornsent suggests a potential personal motivation for her creation of systems that prevent final death. Having experienced the permanent loss of her entire people, it's reasonable to theorize that America may have designed the Tarnished resurrection system as a way to ensure that such irreversible loss could never happen again. From this perspective, the ability to return from death repeatedly would represent the ultimate protection against the kind of genocide that destroyed her homeland. The shamanic abilities that America inherited, particularly the capacity for souls to meld harmoniously with others, could potentially be related to the foundational techniques underlying the Grace resurrection system. This connection remains speculative, but given what we know about shamanic practices in the shadow of the Erdtree expansion, it's possible that America applied her people's spiritual techniques on a cosmic scale to create systems that preserve consciousness and enable transfer between physical forms. The role of Hug, the misbegotten blacksmith, provides additional evidence for this interpretation. Hug speaks of a promise he made to America to forge a weapon capable of killing a god. The timing and nature of this promise suggests it was made in preparation for the Tarnished's return, equipping them for a battle against the very cosmic forces that had empowered America herself. This god-slaying weapon was presumably intended for use against the Elden Beast, the vessel of the greater will that serves as the final boss of the game. The fact that America commissioned such a weapon suggests she always intended for the Tarnished to ultimately overthrow the greater will's influence in the lands between, replacing the existing cosmic order with something new. The various endings available to the Tarnished player reflect this role as cosmic revolutionaries rather than servants of the established order. Whether they choose to restore the Golden Order, replace it with something entirely new, or destroy it altogether, the Tarnished function as agents of fundamental change rather than maintainers of the status quo. The Age of Stars ending, where Rani successfully removes the lands between from the influence of all outer gods, might represent the completion of America's original plan. By empowering agents capable of overthrowing even cosmic authorities, America may have succeeded in freeing her realm from external control entirely. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending presents the most extreme version of this interpretation. By destroying everything through the power of chaos, the Tarnished would ensure that no cosmic authority could ever again impose its will on the lands between. This ending might represent America's ultimate contingency plan. If freedom cannot be achieved through reform or replacement, then destruction becomes preferable to continued subjugation. The revelation about the nature of the greater will's involvement also explains some of the apparent contradictions and inefficiencies in the cosmic order. If the two fingers have been operating without clear guidance for millennia, their increasingly desperate and contradictory actions would make sense. The resurrection of the Tarnished represents not careful divine planning, but the panicked response of abandoned servants trying to fulfill impossible directives. This context transforms our understanding of what the Tarnished are. Rather than being blessed servants of a cosmic authority, they are products of a system in crisis, empowered by entities that no longer understand their own purpose. Their resurrection abilities don't represent divine favor, but desperate necessity. The tools needed to solve problems that their creators can no longer comprehend. The Tarnished thus occupy a unique position in the cosmic hierarchy. They are simultaneously products of the existing order and its greatest threat. Created by the system to preserve itself, they possess the power to fundamentally transform or destroy that same system. Their resurrection abilities enable them to persist through any challenge, while their lack of allegiance to the existing order allows them to pursue truly revolutionary goals. Understanding the Tarnished within this framework reveals them to be neither traditional heroes nor simple protagonists, but rather cosmic wild cards whose ultimate loyalty is to their own judgment rather than any external authority. Their ability to repeatedly return from death ensures they can pursue their chosen path regardless of opposition, while their diverse backgrounds and perspectives ensure that multiple different solutions will be attempted. This interpretation suggests that the question of whether the Tarnished are dead and being resurrected misses the larger point. What matters is not their technical relationship to mortality, but their role as agents of cosmic change, empowered with the tools necessary to remake the world according to their own vision, rather than serving the agenda of entities that may no longer even know what they want. Evidence from character interactions and dialogue. The interactions between the Tarnished and other characters throughout Elden Ring provide crucial insights into the nature of Tarnished resurrection and how it's perceived by the inhabitants of the lands between. These conversations, often subtle and layered with meaning, reveal important details about what the Tarnished are and how their supernatural abilities function within the social and metaphysical framework of the world. One of the most telling examples comes from Sorcerer Roya, whose own experience with death and resurrection provides a direct comparison to the player character's condition. Roya explicitly mentions having died before, stating that he has experienced the resurrection process firsthand. However, his subsequent decline and eventual permanent death demonstrate that not all Tarnished share the same robust connection to grace that enables unlimited resurrection. Roger's dialogue reveals crucial details about how grace-based resurrection feels from the inside. He speaks of growing weary, of feeling his strength ebb away, and of sensing that his time is running out. This isn't the typical fatigue of physical exertion, but something deeper, a spiritual exhaustion that suggests his grace is being depleted with each resurrection. His eventual permanent death confirms that the resurrection system has limits and can fail when pushed too far. The interactions with other Tarnished NPCs also illuminate different aspects of the resurrection phenomenon. Many speak of having lost their grace or being unable to see its guidance, conditions that appear to be connected to their vulnerability to permanent death. These characters often display a sense of resigned fatalism, understanding that they no longer possess the protection that once made them effectively immortal. Vare's dialogue provides another perspective on Tarnished resurrection. as a follower of Morg who has rejected the guidance of the two fingers. Ver represents a Tarnished who has chosen to align with different cosmic forces. His mockery of the two fingers and his claims about their madness suggests that he understands the resurrection system to be flawed or compromised in some way. Melina's interactions with the player character reveal important details about how resurrection appears to outside observers. As of being connected to Marika and the cosmic order, Melina would presumably be able to perceive supernatural phenomena that normal characters might miss. Her casual acceptance of the Tarnished's resurrection ability suggests that it's not unusual or surprising from her perspective, implying that such abilities are known and understood within the cosmic hierarchy. The dialogue with finger reader Enia provides official insight into how the two fingers view Tarnished resurrection. Enia consistently refers to the Tarnished as being given life by grace, a phrasing that suggests their existence is dependent on external divine support rather than being an inherent property. This language implies that the Tarnished are not naturally immortal, but are sustained by an active blessing that could theoretically be withdrawn. Conversations with Gideon Offner reveal how other Tarnished perceive the player character's exceptional abilities. Gideon, despite being highly knowledgeable and well-connected, consistently underestimates the player character's potential. This suggests that even experienced Tarnished don't fully understand the extent of what grace-based resurrection can accomplish, indicating that the player character possesses an unusually robust connection to the system. The interactions with Hug, the misbegotten blacksmith, provide crucial context about the intended purpose of Tarnished resurrection. Hug speaks of his mission to forge a god-slaying weapon, a task he associates directly with the Tarnished's mission. His dialogue suggests that the resurrection abilities of the Tarnished were specifically designed to enable them to face threats that would normally be impossible to overcome, including gods themselves. Rodriguez's dialogue about spirit tuning provides another angle on Tarnished supernatural abilities. Her ability to work with spirits and souls suggests a level of spiritual sensitivity that allows her to perceive aspects of the Tarnished's nature that others might miss. Her casual acceptance of supernatural phenomena and her willingness to work with spirit ashes implies that she sees the Tarnished as part of a broader category of beings that exist partially outside normal mortality. The conversations with D, Hunter of the Dead, reveal how the Golden Order's agents view Tarnished resurrection in relation to other forms of undeath. DE's mission to eliminate those who live in death, while accepting the Tarnished as legitimate, demonstrates that the Golden Order distinguishes between different types of supernatural existence. The Tarnished's resurrection is seen as blessed, while other forms of undeath are considered abominations. Dialogues with various merchants and ordinary NPCs throughout the game reveal how the general population perceives the Tarnished. Most seem aware that Tarnished are somehow different from normal people, but they don't appear to understand the specific nature of their abilities. This suggests that Tarnished resurrection is known to be possible, but not widely understood in its specifics. The interactions with hostile NPCs also provide insights into how enemies perceive Tarnished resurrection. Characters like Elanora or other invading Tarnished don't seem surprised by the player character's ability to return from death, suggesting that resurrection is an expected capability among Tarnished rather than a unique ability. However, their continued hostility implies that they believe they can overcome this advantage through superior skill or power. Conversations with the various Round Hold inhabitants reveal how a community of Tarnished functions when resurrection is commonplace. The casual atmosphere and long-term planning discussions suggest that the inhabitants consider resurrection to be a reliable safety net rather than an uncertain blessing. This normalization of resurrection implies that it's been a consistent feature of Tarnished existence rather than a recent development. The dialogue with Nefeli Lau provides insight into how descendants of the original Tarnished view their supernatural heritage. As a potential heir to Godfrey's legacy, Nefeli seems to understand that Tarnished possess special abilities, but her focus on martial prowess rather than supernatural powers suggests that resurrection abilities are seen as tools rather than defining characteristics. Interactions with the various demigods reveal how cosmic-level beings perceive Tarnished resurrection. Characters like Riard or Mog don't seem particularly concerned about the Tarnished's ability to return from death, suggesting that, from their perspective, resurrection is a minor advantage rather than a game-changing ability. This implies that resurrection is common enough among powerful beings that it doesn't represent a significant tactical advantage. The conversations with Ronnie provide a unique perspective from an Empyrean who has rejected the two fingers and chosen her own path. Ron's casual acceptance of the Tarnished's abilities and her willingness to work with them suggests that resurrection is not tied exclusively to loyalty to the Golden Order. This implies that the supernatural systems supporting resurrection are more fundamental than the political structures built on top of them. Dialogue with various spirit ashes and ghostly characters reveals how the dead perceive the Tarnished. These beings often seem confused or troubled by the Tarnished's presence, suggesting that their resurrection ability places them in a liminal state that's neither fully alive nor properly dead. This reaction implies that the Tarnished exist in a supernatural category that other spiritual beings find difficult to categorize. The interactions with Torrent the spectral steed, provide a non-verbal form of evidence about tarnished nature. Torrent's willingness to serve the tarnished and ability to be summoned repeatedly suggests that the tarnished supernatural nature extends to their relationships with other mystical beings. The seamless partnership between tarnished and spirit steed implies that resurrection abilities are part of a broader supernatural framework. Conversations with characters who have lost their grace reveal the psychological impact of losing access to resurrection. These individuals often display increased caution, fatalism, or desperation, suggesting that the knowledge of permanent vulnerability to death fundamentally changes how one approaches life and decision. This contrast highlights how profoundly the resurrection ability affects the tarnished's worldview and behavior. The dialogue with various related NPCs reveals how different factions view the ultimate purpose of tarnished resurrection, whether working toward the Age of Stars, the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending, or other conclusions. These characters treat the tarnished's supernatural abilities as tools for achieving cosmic-level change rather than ends in themselves. When examined collectively, these character interactions paint a picture of tarnished resurrection as a known but exceptional supernatural phenomenon. It's accepted as real and understood to be connected to grace and the cosmic order, but its specific mechanics remain mysterious even to those who experience it. The general consensus seems to be that the tarnished exist in a unique supernatural state that grants them extraordinary capabilities while maintaining their essential humanity and agency. This evidence from character interactions supports the interpretation that the tarnished are not simply undead or immortal beings, but rather living individuals who have been granted access to supernatural systems that protect them from permanent death. Their resurrection abilities are recognized as real and significant, but they're also understood to be conditional and dependent on maintaining their connection to the forces that grant them this protection. The shadow of the Erdtree revelations, the shadow of the tree expansion, has fundamentally transformed our understanding of Elden Ring's cosmology and the forces that govern life, death, and resurrection in the lands between. The revelations about America's origins, the nature of the two fingers, and the true relationship between the greater will and its supposed servants provide crucial new context for understanding what the tarnished are and how their resurrection abilities function within the broader cosmic framework. Perhaps the most significant revelation is the discovery of Mater, Mother of Fingers, and the truth about the two-finger relationship with the greater will. Meat was indeed the first emissary of the greater will to reach the lands between, predating even the elder beast. However, her communication with the greater will was severed long ago, leaving her broken and abandoned. Despite this severed connection, Meisha continued to birth two fingers and guide Empyreans based on outdated instructions and her own interpretation of what the Greater Will would want. This revelation completely recontextualizes the resurrection of the Tarnished. Rather than representing the execution of a current divine plan, the calling back of the dead Tarnished might represent the actions of cosmic entities operating without clear guidance from their supposed master. The two fingers, believing themselves to be following the Greater Will's desires, activated what they thought was an appropriate response to the crisis of the shattering. But they were actually improvising based on ancient directives. The discovery of America's origins in the shaman village provides another crucial piece of the puzzle. The revelation that America was originally one of the shamans, a people whose flesh could meld harmoniously with others, suggests that her ability to create the grace network and enable tarnished resurrection might have been rooted in shamanic spiritual techniques rather than purely divine authority. The shamanic practice of soul working and spiritual melding scaled up to cosmic proportions could explain the sophisticated resurrection technology that supports the Tarnished. The tragedy of the shaman village, where America's people were tortured and killed by the Hornsent to create jar saints, provides a deeply personal motivation for Mi's actions. Having experienced the irreversible loss of her entire people, America may have designed the Tarnished resurrection system as a way to ensure that such final permanent loss could never happen again. The ability to return from death repeatedly represents the ultimate protection against the kind of genocide that destroyed her homeland. The connection between the jar rituals and shamanic abilities also illuminates the technical aspects of tarnished resurrection. The horn scents stuffed shamanic flesh into jars, specifically because of its ability to meld with other substances, creating composite beings. This same principle applied more sophisticatedly might underlie the process by which tarnished consciousness can be separated from a destroyed body and relocated to a new physical form at sites of grace. The revelation about the Erdtree and its relationship to the tree provides additional context for understanding the infrastructure that supports resurrection. The Erdtree appears to be the shadow or complement of the tree, representing aspects of existence that the Golden Order sought to suppress or control. The parallel systems of power enhancement and resurrection found in the realm of shadow suggest that resurrection technology is not unique to the Golden Order, but represents applications of more fundamental cosmic principles. The discovery that the land of shadow was deliberately concealed by America adds another layer to our understanding of her long-term planning. By hiding this realm where she conducted her crusade against the Hornsent and concealed evidence of her true origins, America created a hidden repository of knowledge and power that could be accessed when needed. The resurrection systems in the realm of shadow might represent backup or alternative implementations of the technology that supports tarnished resurrection. The quest line involving Count Emir and the revelation about Mesh's broken state provides crucial insight into how cosmic systems can continue functioning even when their original purpose has been lost or corrupted. Emir's understanding that the two fingers are flawed and his attempts to communicate directly with Mesha suggests that the entire system of divine guidance has been compromised for far longer than anyone realized. This understanding transforms the Tarnished's role from servants of divine will to agents operating within a system that has lost its original direction. Their resurrection abilities don't represent divine blessing, but rather access to powerful supernatural technology created by entities that no longer understand their own purpose. This makes the Tarnished's choices and actions even more significant, as they're not fulfilling predetermined divine plans, but rather making decisions that will shape the future of a cosmos without clear guidance. The revelation about Mik-Ella's attempt to achieve godhood through the gate of divinity provides another perspective on the relationship between death, resurrection, and divine power. Mik-Ella's sacrifice of parts of himself to achieve godhood suggests that the process of becoming a god requires a fundamental transformation that might be incompatible with normal resurrection. This could explain why the Tarnished, despite their supernatural abilities, must choose between different endings rather than simply becoming gods themselves. The connection between the gate of divinity and the bodies trapped within its structure suggests that godhood might require the sacrifice of resurrection abilities. If becoming a god involves a fundamental change in the nature of existence that precludes return from death, then the Tarnished's resurrection abilities might actually prevent them from achieving the ultimate divine transformation. The discovery of Mesma and his role as America's hidden son provides additional context for understanding America's long-term planning. Mesma's crusade against the Hornsent, conducted in secret in the realm of shadow, suggests that America's creation of the Tarnished was part of a multi-generational plan that involved multiple hidden agents and contingencies. The Tarnished might represent just one element of a complex strategy that spans centuries. The revelation about the nature of the serpent within Mesma and its connection to the base serpent provides insight into how supernatural entities can be contained within living beings. This mechanism might be similar to how grace and resurrection abilities are embedded within the Tarnished, not as inherent properties, but as supernatural entities or forces that have been bound to them through divine intervention. The discovery of America's final visit to the shaman village, where she bathed it in healing gold, despite knowing there was no one left to heal, reveals the emotional core of her actions. This gesture suggests that all of America's subsequent actions, including the creation of the Tarnished, were motivated by a desire to prevent the kind of irreversible loss she had experienced. The Tarnished's resurrection abilities represent the ultimate expression of this desire, the creation of beings who cannot be permanently lost. The revelation about the true nature of the Jar Saints and their connection to shamanic practices provides a horrifying context for understanding what America survived and why she might have been motivated to create systems that prevent final death, the torture and dismemberment of her people to create artificial saints represents the kind of ultimate violation that would justify extreme measures to prevent its recurrence. The connection between shamanic soul melding abilities and the advanced spiritual technology of the Golden Order suggests that America's greatest achievement was not simply becoming a god, but rather applying her people's spiritual techniques on a cosmic scale. The Grace Network, the resurrection systems, and the entire infrastructure of the Golden Order might represent shamanic practices elevated to divine implementation. The shadow of the Erdtree expansion ultimately reveals that the Tarnished's resurrection abilities are not divine gifts, but rather sophisticated applications of shamanic spiritual technology implemented by a goddess, motivated by profound personal loss, and operated by cosmic entities that have lost contact with their original authority. This context makes the Tarnished's choices and actions even more significant, as they represent the exercise of free will within systems designed to prevent the ultimate loss that motivated their creation. The Tarnished are not puppets of divine will, but rather the inheritors of America's attempt to create beings who could overcome any challenge, including death itself. Their resurrection abilities are the technical implementation of a mother's desire to ensure that what happened to her people could never happen to anyone else. Understanding this context transforms the question of whether the Tarnished are dead, and being resurrected into a deeper inquiry about the nature of love, loss, and the lengths to which one will go to protect others from experiencing ultimate tragedy. Conclusion and final theories. Based on the extensive evidence examined, we can now provide a comprehensive interpretation of the central question. Are the Tarnished actually dead and being resurrected, or is something else entirely happening? The evidence suggests a complex answer that transcends traditional categories of life, death, and undeath. The Tarnished appear to exist in a unique supernatural state that combines elements of both life and death. They are not simply dead beings returned to life, nor are they conventionally living individuals who happen to be very difficult to kill. Instead, the evidence could suggest they represent something altogether different, living beings who have been equipped with sophisticated supernatural systems that prevent them from experiencing true death. by preserving their consciousness when their physical form is destroyed. The opening narration's description of the Tarnished as ye dead, who yet live, proves to be literally accurate in a way that initially appears paradoxical. The Tarnished were indeed dead during their exile from the lands between. They lived full lives in foreign lands, aged, died, and remained dead for potentially centuries or millennia. Then, when America's contingency plan was activated after the shattering, they were called back to life through a mass resurrection event that restored not just their grace, but their very existence. However, based on the evidence available, this initial resurrection appears to have been just the beginning of their transformation. Upon their return to the lands between, the Tarnished seemed to have become participants in a supernatural system that fundamentally altered their relationship with mortality. They were connected to the Grace Network, which could be understood as a sophisticated infrastructure that monitors their condition and intervenes to prevent permanent death. When a Tarnished receives fatal damage, the evidence suggests they don't actually die in the conventional sense. Instead, based on the mechanics we observe, the Grace system appears to activate, potentially extracting their consciousness and memories at the moment of physical destruction, and transferring them to the nearest site of grace, where they are provided with a completely restored physical form. This interpretation would explain why the process maintains perfect continuity of identity and memory, while the damaged original body is left behind. This interpretation could explain why Tarnished resurrection feels different from traditional undeath. Based on this reading, the Tarnished don't experience the suffering, decay, or compulsions typically associated with undead existence, because they never actually become undead. They would be experiencing consciousness preservation and body replacement rather than death and resurrection. Their supernatural state could be maintained through what might be understood as technological rather than necrontic means, though this goes beyond what is explicitly stated in the law. The dependency of this system on grace and sites of grace explains why some Tarnished eventually face permanent death. The Grace Network requires energy and resources to function, and repeated uses constrain or deplete an individual's connection to the system. When grace is withdrawn or exhausted, the protective technology fails, leaving the Tarnished vulnerable to true death. The sophisticated nature of this system could reflect its possible origins in shamanic spiritual practices elevated to divine implementation. America's background as one of the shamans, whose people possessed the ability to meld harmoniously with others, may have provided foundational techniques that were later scaled up to create the Grace Network. The trauma of losing her entire people to the Hornson's jar rituals could have motivated her to create systems that would prevent such irreversible loss from ever occurring again. though this connection remains interpretive. The revelation that the two fingers may have been operating without current guidance from the greater will adds another important consideration to our understanding. Based on this discovery, the Tarnished's resurrection abilities might not represent active divine blessing, but rather access to powerful supernatural systems maintained by cosmic entities that have lost touch with their original purpose. This would make the Tarnished's agency and choices even more significant, as they would not be fulfilling predetermined divine plans, but rather exercising free will within systems designed to enable their success. The comparison with other supernatural states in the lands between reinforces this interpretation. Those who live in death represent corruption and failure of the normal cosmic order, while the Tarnished represent a functioning alternative system. The Tarnished's resurrection is controlled, preserves identity and free will, and serves constructive purposes, while other forms of undeath are typically chaotic, degrading, and destructive. The ultimate purpose of the Tarnished becomes clear when viewed within this framework. They are not simply warriors sent to restore the Golden Order, but rather agents of potential cosmic transformation, equipped with the tools necessary to overcome any challenge, including death itself. Their resurrection abilities enable them to persist through any obstacle, while their diverse backgrounds and philosophies ensure that multiple approaches to cosmic problems will be attempted. The various endings available to the Tarnished reflect this role as agents of change rather than servants of the established order. Whether they choose to restore the Golden Order, replace it with something new, or destroy it entirely, the Tarnished function as wild cards in a cosmic game whose original rules and objectives have been lost or corrupted. This understanding transforms the significance of the Tarnished's journey. They are not simply following a predetermined path, but rather exercising agency within systems designed to enable their success. Regardless of their chosen goals, their resurrection abilities are not rewards for faithful service, but tools provided to ensure they can pursue their chosen path despite any opposition. The question of whether the Tarnished are dead and being resurrected ultimately misses the larger point about their nature and purpose. What matters is not their technical relationship to mortality, but their role as agents empowered to reshape the cosmic order according to their own judgment. They exist in a supernatural state that transcends normal categories of life and death, equipped with technology that enables them to overcome challenges that would be impossible for purely mortal beings. The Tarnished could represent what might be understood as America's attempt to create beings capable of overcoming the kind of irreversible loss she experienced, while possessing the agency to choose their own path forward. Based on this interpretation, they would exist in a supernatural state that transcends normal categories of life and death, potentially representing a fusion of mortal consciousness with supernatural systems that enable them to persist through any challenge while maintaining their essential humanity and free will. In the end, the Tarnished embody themes that resonate throughout all of FromSoftware's work. The struggle against seemingly impossible odds, the power of persistence in the face of repeated failure, and the ultimate triumph of individual agency over cosmic determinism. Their ability to return from death repeatedly isn't just a gameplay mechanic, but a thematic statement about the power of choice and determination to overcome any obstacle, including mortality itself. The mystery of the Tarnished's nature reveals itself to be not a question about death and resurrection, but a meditation on the lengths love will go to protect others from ultimate loss, the power of technology to transcend natural limitations, and the responsibility that comes with the freedom to choose one's own destiny in a universe where the original authorities have abandoned their posts. As you venture forth in the lands between, remember that every death you suffer and every resurrection you experience is not just a return to life, but a testament to one goddess's determination that no one should ever again face the irreversible loss she endured. The Tarnished are not the dead returned to life, but the living equipped with the ultimate protection against loss, the power to try again, to persist, and ultimately to choose their own fate in a cosmos that has forgotten its own purpose. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of Elden Ring's most fascinating mysteries. If you enjoyed this exploration of Tarnished Resurrection, please like this video and subscribe for more in-depth analysis of the rich lore that makes these games so compelling. The lands between hold many more secrets waiting to be uncovered, and together we'll continue to piece together the intricate stories that Miyazaki and his team have woven for us to discover.